Okay, now we're recording. We're on. This week is Parshat Bamidbar, and even though there's a lot we could discuss in Bamidbar, lots of names and numbers, etc., but what I wanted to do was to talk a little bit about Shavuos, which is coming, and it really plays off something that we mentioned last week. Last week when we talked about reading the Tochacha, which we read last Shabbos, the Tochacha before Shavuos, and I said that the term for Shavuos in the Chumash always is Atzeret. Atzeret. So I had to ask you how to define Atzeret. I don't know how to define Atzeret. But before we even begin that, we should have a good thought. We should hopefully, in the matter of our learning, our communal study, we should be safety and security in Israel. It's a very, very volatile situation right now, and it's just bad. There's nothing good to say about it. So already, people were killed today from rocket fire, and it's very, very upsetting, especially those of us that have family there or children there. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen, and there we go. Okay, you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Not a lot of sources. It's a 2-pager, but I think it's a really good framework that we could have going into the Yontif of Shavuos. It's hard to believe that it's already Shavuos. And if we think sort of like last year when we didn't have Shavuos, I mean, you know what I mean, is that we were still locked down on Shavuos. So we thought after Pesach, I'll be a couple of weeks, I'll warm up, I'll be fine. And then came Shavuos. I'm like, we missed the entire, Sphere Omer in Shul. We missed the entire book of Vayikra in Shul. So it was really something. So, but Shavuos is one of those holidays it kind of creeps up on you, even though we're preparing for it literally every day by counting the Omer, but it still kind of creeps up on you. And I don't know if it hit any of you maybe in the last day or two or not yet, saying, oh, shoot, I got to get ready for Shavuos. It's like I have a 2-day Yontif coming and I have to prepare and I have to cook and what are we doing the meals? What are dairy, meat, right? It is a 3-day Yontif because it's Shabbos and then we go right into it Sunday night. Okay. So there's a lot. I mean, wait till we have on September, we have a 5-day Yontif because it's Labor Day going into Rosh Hashanah. Labor Day is Monday. Monday night is Rosh Hashanah. Barbecue. Right? We're going to barbecue. We go right from the barbecue to the repenting. So there's a lot to do. So I want to give us the proper framework by which we can maybe appreciate this Chag. And there's a lot of, if I ask you kind of what is the significance of this Chag? So most people would probably say the same thing because it's the motif that's described to us in davening and Kiddush, Zman Matan Toratenu. It's the time of the giving of our Torah, okay? Even though it doesn't say that anywhere in the Chumash. In the Chumash, why? Because Shavuos doesn't have a date that's mentioned in the Torah. Shavuos, we know it because it comes a certain amount of days after Passover, and we can't have a Shavuos without a Pesach, which is important. If I ask you what's the longest holiday in the world, the answer is Pesach, because Pesach lasts all the way until Shavuos, which we will see. So, but it has taken on the moniker of Zman Matan Torah Seinu, the time of the giving of our Torah, because that's the theme. Now, there's also one of the puzzling things about Shavuos is that there is no what we call mitzvahs hayom. There is no sort of ritual object that signifies this holiday, like matzah on Pesach, sukkah, lulav and esrog on Sukkas, shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So what do we have on Shavuos? So people ask you, what's the symbol? It's cheesecake. Right? Cheesecake. What if you're like me? You don't eat any dairy at all. What do you do? And don't say parv cheesecake, because that's like parv cheesecake is. I love cheesecake, by the way. I love. I just cannot eat it any longer. What am I going to do? These are my challenges in life. But it's not. So what's cheese? So you ask yourself, wait, what does cheesecake have to do with Shavuos? Oh, because there's a custom to eat dairy. And is it a custom? Is it a law? When do we eat it? Isn't there a law that you're supposed to eat meat on Yontif? Like, so we have all kinds of questions that come up. And if it's the time of the giving of the Torah, why isn't sort of the Torah the symbol for Shavuos?
Mhm.
Shouldn't Simchas Torah really be on Shavuos? Right? It's a fair question. Right? Why is Simchas Torah? Like, by the way, nobody would complain if we got rid of Simchas Torah, like after all the holidays we have in September, October. Nobody would complain if we decided to lop off Simchas Torah, put it somewhere else. It would be nice. Like, well, we could boost up Shavuos a little bit here, make it a little bit easier over there, balance it out a bit. Okay. Anyway, so this is why we have to kind of figure out, like, what is Shavuos? So if I ask you, what is, if you would look in this, again, go back to the synagogue in which I grew up, and, we had the old Birnbaum Siddur, which my father, Zichron Livracha, only wanted the Birnbaum because he liked the font, he liked the print, he felt the art scroll was too small, the pages were too light. I don't know. Now I just, because I'm getting older, I can't see anything. And, Shoemaker's Wife, how it went. Keep going and keep bumping on my prescription. I still can't see anything. It's also allergies. But the Birnbaum Siddur, how would it describe, let's say, Shavuos in there? It would say either the Feast of Weeks, or it would say, was it a Pentecost, right? No, is that right? Was it? I know that Tabernacles is Sukkas, or Pentecost. I don't know. I don't even know. But I'm just saying, it would have some like weird word, which is like, what is that? So Shavuot literally means weeks. And there's one other element that we include with Shavuos, which is maybe why we read Ruth, by the way. So we're gonna have a super special extra reading of Ruth. I have to give a little plug here. We're having a women's afternoon on Tuesday afternoon. We're having a women's only study group with Erica Brown. But during that study group, there will also be a women's reading of Megillat Ruth. Now, you know me, I'm no feminist, even though I live with mostly women. But what happened is that last year, Gracie Sachs had her bat mitzvah and Nebuchadnezzar got stuck on Zoom. So she learned it. I taught her. She learned Megillat Ruth, and she and her mother did it together. So I said, why don't we recreate that?
That's beautiful.
So Gracie's doing a chapter, and then I convinced the ever so talented, amazingly easy to convince Adina Klebanov, who's not yet 12, to do 2 of the chapters. And she picked it up in like 2 seconds. Halavai, my bar mitzvah student should be that easy. And this is why I say this is why girls don't lane, because they make the boys look so bad. In literally 1 week, she had the whole chapter down. And the next week, she had the second chapter down with every knach and every this. And she has a beautiful voice. And Jill Sachs is actually going to do the last chapter. So it'll be a nice outdoor event, collation, learning, Megillah, a nice event for the women to come together. So that's probably, so why Ruth? Why Ruth, however you want to say it. So that's the first pasuk on our page. Uvayom habikurim b'hakrivchem mincha chadasha l'Hashem b'shavu osechem mikra kodesh yalachem kol malachas avoda lo sa'asu. On the day of your first fruit. So bikurim is the first fruit. So we learned it in Parshas Kisavo, that when a person comes into the land of Israel and they had to bring the first fruits. And so when did they bring it? They brought it on Shavuos. So it says on the day of the first fruits, your Feast of Weeks. Oh, here we go, Feast of Weeks. When you bring an offering of new grain to the Lord, you shall observe a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. Okay, that's the translation of Isser Malacha. Kol Malacha Savadol Sasu, which means Yantif. So notice what does it not say? So this is in Parshas Pinchas, when listing all the holidays. I didn't bring it in context, but trust me, it's when we list all the holidays. So what is not said here?
Receiving the Torah.
Right, it says nothing about receiving the Torah. It also doesn't say Shavuos. It says when you bring a mincha chadasha l'Hashem b'shavu osechem. When you bring your weeks. Now here they translate on the day of the first week, your Feast of Weeks. But it doesn't really say that, your Feast of Weeks. It doesn't say Chag Shavuot Osechem. It just says Bishavuot Osechem. Meaning, what's the weeks? Because the starting of the Omer, and we counted the days and the weeks, and here we are at the culmination of it. Okay, so it's called Yom Chag HaBikurim. Now, it's funny because the Torah calls it Chag HaBikurim or Yom HaBikurim, and that's like the last thing that we call it. You ever hear anybody say, "Oh, what are you making for Chag HaBikurim? Who are you having over for Bikurim? What are you making for Bikurim? Where are you going for Bikurim?" Are you going to the program, Bikurim? There's a nice Bikurim program. It's very good. They have great speakers. Right? Like nobody says.
Actually, you should go to the kibbutzim, and it's all about Bikurim and these programs with machinery. It's very interesting.
Yes. Well, that's like we say mikata lakata. And of course, in the agricultural society, it was a very, very big deal. And they try to make every holiday into some sort of in the agricultural aspect of it. And they'll say maybe they don't have the Torah part, depending on what kind of kibbutz that you're in. But definitely, if you live in it, but we don't live in an agricultural society. We merely benefit from an agricultural society. And we say Shavuos. By the way, you know what the number one nagging question about Shavuos is? Why are there 2 days of Shavuos? So, Hagam, you're going to tell me, why do we have 2 days of Yontif? Why do we have 2 days of Yontif? Because at the time, in the Beis HaMikdash, and then the people were far away, they couldn't know when the new month was, so just to be sure, they had 2 days. Okay, so I understand that for Rosh Hashanah, even, which is a whole different thing. I understand it for Sukkas, they didn't have time to get there, Pesach, but if by the time Pesach rolled around and then they had to count the days, we know when Shavuos is, right? Especially if it's not a calendaric date. It's X amount of days after Pesach. So why in the world do we have two days of Shavuos? The Rambam asked this question. It's a very good question. And he says that basically, you're right. There's no reason to have 2 days of Shavuos. But because we're called low plug, we don't want to mess up and say like this one is 1, this one is 2, this one is 1, this one is 2. Therefore, we kept them all universally as 2. And what's the real reason why we have 2 days of Yontif here? The real reason is to like rub it in, remind us that we're in the diaspora. So like my daughter just this morning on our daily phone call, did not rub it into me that she has only 1 day of Yontif, and the satisfaction that she has of saying that she has 1 day of Yontif and I don't, that's exactly the point, is that it has to be rubbed into, all right, no, these are the choices we make. Okay, so that's Yom HaBikurim. Look at the Targum Yonasan Ben Azil, source number 2 here. The Targum Yonasan, and by the way, this appears in all the various Targums in the Aramaic translation. This is considered an authoritative sort of translation, which Rashi often quotes Targum to help us understand what's going on and what the words mean. So Uviyoma de Bikuraya, Bikurvchon Dorana min Alalta Chadata, Kadam Hashem Ba'atzartechon. So likewise, on the day of your firstlings, okay, this is like more like I need a Targum for the translation of the Targum. Likewise, on the day of your firstlings, that's again your first fruit, when you offer the gift from the new produce before the Lord in your ingatherings. That's the word we want to look at there. See, in your ingatherings, after the 7 weeks are completed, you shall have a holy convocation. No servile work shall you do. Okay, Kadismalun Shiva Sai Shivuaya Ma'ara Kadish Yehelachon Kol Avidis Pulchana Los Abdon. What's the word here? Atzartechon. Okay, that's in the bold. Atzartechon. So you see what's the shorish of that word is Atzeret. So before you go further, when I say Atzeret, Atzeres or Atzeret, what do you think of automatically? Correct. Miriam said Schmini Atzeres. So what does Schmini Atzeres mean? Where does that come from? Or where's the word Atzeres mean? Or let's put it this in modern Hebrew. Okay. What is the shorish of the word Atzeres? It's like Atzor.
Like to stop.
To stop. Aret.
It's the end or something. I don't know.
The end. Atzor. Atzeres. So here it uses the word you're in gatherings. You're in gatherings. So we're going to see the medrash in a second, but there's something about so wait a minute. But when they say Atzeret, usually we think of Shmini Atzeres. Remember, that's we call the second days of Sukkas. Okay. Now, is Shmini Atzeres part of Sukkas or not?
No.
Louder, Shelley. What?
No, it's not.
No, Shelley said no. Why not?
It's a separate holiday.
It's a separate holiday. It's a holiday. And so if Sukkas is about Sukkah and Lulav and Esrog, what is Shmini Atzeres about? And it's not Simchas Torah, because Simchas Torah is a made-up holiday many, many years later.
It's an extra day. Isn't it the extra day that Hashem wants us to hang out?
No, it says something in the Torah. I mean, it specifies Shmini Atzeret, but I can't remember what it says.
It does. It says V'yama Shmini Atzeret Yelachem. But yes, you're both right. And as Vivian correctly said, it's an extra day. Okay, it reminds me. That is the source and the inspiration for the famous Jackson Browne song, right? Stay a little bit longer.
But isn't that more like a spiritual reason, but not the real reason?
It's so the Torah doesn't. The Torah just says on the 8th day Atzeres Tilachem. So we'll see in this medrash now, what does it mean? Using that translation, then we have to figure out if that's the case, why that's Atzeres and the Torah calls it Atzeres. Why did the rabbinic literature here refer to Shavuos as Atzeres? So let's see this next medrash, source number 3. Amar Rabbi Tuviohu Rabbi Eliezer Chazarti al kol inyanei hamoados. So this comes from Medrash Lechach Tov, where it's in the Piska Zudrasa. He says, I have looked over all of the holidays. V'lo matzasi chag Shavuot shenikra Atzeres. And he goes, and I've never seen that Shavuos is called Atzeres. What he's saying is that, however, but every time in the Gemara, when the Gemara says Atzeres plain, not Schmini Atzeres, the Gemara just says Atzeres, which we saw last week, Atzeres means Shavuos. So like, where do you get it from? And he says, and I see that the rabbis in all the rabbinic literature, they call Shavuos Atzeres, v'hu lashon targum de'amar unkelos hager ba'atzar tachon. And he says it's the language. Where do we get Atzeres from? From the Targum, which he quotes Targum Onkelos. I brought the Targum Yonasan ben Azil, both of the similar ilk of Aramaic translation. And he says Onkelos hager says Atzar tachon. So therefore, you have Atzeret. They translate the word of Shavuos Eichan, with not literally of weeks, but Atzar Techon. Nemar Atzeres b'Shvi shel Pesach, v'nemar Atzeres b'Shmini shel Chag, l'hakish l'olini. So therefore, we have to make some sort of comparison that on Pesach and on Sukkas, it says the word Atzeres. So here also, there has to be Atzeres. B'Chag HaMatzos, B'Chag HaShavuos, B'Chag HaSukkos, Hukshul Zelazeh. So in other words, it says the word Atzeres by Pesach. It says the word Atzeres by Sukkah. So there has to be some sort of connection here. So what does that come from? Here we see this seminal piece of the Ramban, which I want to share with you. And this hopefully will put everything into focus, but giving us a great understanding of what.
How does it use Atzeret with Pesach?
It says it in the pasuk. It does. Let's look at this Ramban here, and then you'll see what I mean. I have it. It's not on my screen, but if you have the copy of it, the English is on the bottom. This is the Ramban in Parshas Emor. Now, by the way, the Ramban, I'm sorry, the Chagim appear in various places in the Chumash, and you have to look at each one sort of in its own context. They appear in Parshas Mishpatim, they appear in Kisisa, and they appear in Emor, and they appear in Pinchas, and they appear in Re'eh, and various places here and there. A lot of them have, again, that gives us how we know what to read, by the way, on the holiday. So, and by the way, the telling thing is what do we read on Shavuos on the first day? We read the 10 Commandments. Because again, there's no mitzvahs hayom. So on Pesach, every day of Pesach we have a different reading. On Sukkas, we read from Emor, and we read the holiday stuff. We read all the holiday stuff. Shavuos, we're gonna read the holiday stuff. We read kind of what happened, the historical kind of what happened on that day, which is unusual, because there was nothing else. In the Maftir reading, okay, we have a couple of sentences about it, but okay. So look at the Ramban here. So this is Nachmanides on Parshas Emor, and he says like this: Atzeres. The pasuk says Atzeres. Actually, let me pull up the exact verse for you. Okay, if I look up in Leviticus 23:36, which we just read, Simeon Migdal, which he read. Now, what happens is when I teach these boys, for the rest of my life, whenever I hear that parsha, I hear that kid's voice, and I hear myself hitting him on the head, like again. Okay, so 23:36. Here we go. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe leimor, daber bnei Yisrael leimor b'chamisha asar yom lechodesh hashviz chag Sukkas. So this is Sukkas. On Sukkas, on the 15th day of the 7th month, we have Sukkas. On the first day is Yantif, and then 7 days Shivas yamim tokrivu ishel Hashem. 7 days you bring ishel Hashem. Bayom hashmini mikarkor shelachem v'yikraftem ishel Hashem atzeres hi kol meleches avodah lo sa'asu. On the 8th day, it's also Yontif. You have to bring an offering, but it says the word Atzeres. The word is Atzeres. Let me just see. Okay, so this is the Ramban here. The Ramban says as follows: Atzarti eschem lefonai. God said, I have, what's the word here? I have held you back, right? I've held you back in front of me. Kemelech shazimin es banavus kach v'kach yom. Like a king, and always, by the way, in every mashal, in every parable, it's always a king. There's nobody else in parables allowed except kings. And the king invited his children to come for Yontif, kach v'kach yomim. Kivu, now this is where it already diverges from reality. Kivin shehegias manali pater, when it came time for them to go back home, Omer bevakasha mikem ikvu imi od yom echad shekashe alai predaschem. Lashon Rashi, he quotes Rashi. It's a medrash. He says that when it came time for them to leave, he said, "Please, come on, stay one more day. Please, like leave already." You know, like I told you about the sign. We love company. Some company makes us happy by coming. Some makes us happy by leaving. Or after a few days, like fish, it starts to smell. You go on and on and on and on. I just this week, someone showed me a sign that said, "Friends here, welcome anytime, family by appointment." You know, like so, go on and on and on and on. Okay, so that's so Rashi says. Oh, God said. Now, by the way, put this in the whole context because there's Rosh Hashanah. And then there's Atzeret Yemei Tshuva, and then there's Yom Kippur, and then there's Sukkas, and then there's Chol Hamoed, and then there's Hoshana Rabbah. And it's like, if I were to say to you at any time, going forward, we are now going to end the high holidays or the holiday season or whatever. We're going to stop at Hoshana Rabbah. I don't think anybody in the world would complain. Not a single, but because what happens all too often, especially to the phenomenal women in our lives who make everything happen, is that by the time of Shmini, I'd say, another meal. How late are you going to be home from shul? What? Right? He said, no, my God, more coming. And by the time that Shmini Cerris and Simchas Torah are over, you want to go to sleep for about a week, right? If I have to look at one more tin pan from Amazing Savings, with the foil that won't stay on or the covers that won't stay sealed in the refrigerator and putting in, like, I don't know what's what anymore, right? I'm going to go bananas. Like, what do I need this for? Right? What? This is what God wants from me. So God is saying, no, don't leave. No. We want to go. We want to be done by Hoshana Rabbah. No. It's like, what day? Let's stay for, it's like your kid saying, can I stay for 5 more minutes? 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes. That's Rashi. The Ramban quoting Rashi says, and he says this comes from the Medrash in Vayikra. And here's what he says: he says 6 days God created the world, and on the 7th day is Shabbos. By the way, that's of course a major tenet of everything that we do, and it plays a key role in everything that we have in our lives. Is 6 years followed by the 7th day off. We have Shemitah. We had this last Shabbos. We have the notion of, I mean, just think about it. If we did not have sort of the holiday or Shabbos cycle, the amount of monotony which it would create, which by the way, this also creates a certain type of monotony, but the monotony that we would have without any sort of spiritual recounting or sort of assessment in our lives, we would be really, really lost. But even like, okay, another Shabbos, another Shabbos, and a Shabbos. That's why we have Yontif. Yontif also kind of like throws off the schedule and helps us kind of adjust and readjust. He says, Ve'ein lo ben zug. He says, there's no comparison. What's the comparison? What's the partner of creation, 6 days and the 7th day? Knesset Yisrael hipasugo, shenamar v'aretz. He says, really, what's the partner in creation is the congregation of Israel, because it says on the earth, meaning the earth is being the 8th day. So what's Atzeret? V'hine hi sheminis Atzeresi, ki sham netzar hakol. He says it's called Atzeret, everything is netzar. He says here the word from assembled. He says everything is assembled. So what does that mean, assembled? B'tziva b'chag hamatzos shivas yomim b'kedusha lifneihem lachareihem ki kulam kedoshim v'socham Hashem. He says, wait a minute. So I understand in Sukkas, we have Yontif, and then we have Atzeret, it's the leftover at the end. He says, but Pesach is all holy. He says, if we have all the holiness, we have 7 days, first and 7 being holy. He says, and then like, and it's all, it says, kulam kedoshim. Umana mimenu tishim va'arba'im yom, shiva Shavuos kimei olam, v'kidesh yom hashmini keshmini shel chag. V'hayomim hasur me'tayim kecholo shel moed bein harishon v'hashmini b'chag. V'hu yom matan Torah, sheheram bo es isho hagdola, udvarav shemo mitoch ha'esh, v'lekach yichiru rabbeinu zah b'chol makom chag Shavuos Cerris, ki hu kayom shmini shel chag shekaru ha'kosav kain. This Ramban says an absolutely beautiful thing, a beautiful idea here. And again, this is part of reframing our mindset of how we look at Shavuos. He says, what happens on Sukkas? We have Sukkas, we have Yontif, we have Chol HaMoed, and then we have Atzeret. He says, now even though that Pesach also has a Chol HaMoed, but Pesach is always considered one unit. And how do you know the difference? Is like, for instance, on the 2nd days of Yontif on Pesach, we don't make Shechianu. We don't say full halal, all those things, because it's really, everything is Novea, everything springs from the first days of Yontif. So we have, on Sukkas, we have Yontif, we enjoy it, and then we have Chol HaMoed, and then we have Atzeret to kind of make it in between. He says, but Pesach, don't look at Pesach, Chol HaMoed, 2nd day's Pesach. He says, that's not how you look at it. He says, you have Pesach, and then we have the counting of the days until Shavuos. He says, those days in between, in other words, the days of Sfira, the Ramban says, are like Chol HaMoed. It's an amazing thing. He says, "V'hayomim hasvurim bein time kechol shamoed bein harishon v'hashmini b'chag v'yom matan Torah." What's the 8th day? What's the end of Chol HaMoed of Pesach? Not the 2nd days. The end of Chol HaMoed is Shavuos. So it's almost like Pesach begins the 1st days. We have the Seder. When does Pesach end? It ends at Shavuos. But it's going from the forming as a nation, coming out of Egypt, out of slavery, God delivering you as a nation, and that culminates with the giving of the Torah, which gives you the law of a nation. So it's sort of this like nationalistic pride almost, but in a religious sense, and all the days in between are like a Chol HaMoed. It's like a Chol HaMoed. Now, based on this, a lot of the Rabbanim write that we normally associate Sfiras Omer with mourning. We talk about the students of Rabbi Akiva, and Baban, and this and that, and of course the Crusades, which is why we stay Avarachamim even when we bench Rosh Chodesh. We still say Avarachamim because Avarachamim was written in memory of those who died in the Crusades, and we know for a fact that many of the communities that were obliterated, it took place during the months of Iyar and Sivan. So in other words, this coming Shabbos, even though tonight is Rosh Chodesh, and then tomorrow. We won't say Tachnun for the next 2 weeks or so, but even it's a non-Tachnun day, we still say Avarachamim on Shabbos because of the Crusades. Now, during the 9 days, for instance, when we bench Rosh Chodesh Av, it's 3 weeks, we don't say Avarachamim. But that's because Avarachamim is specific to this time period, and it would be wrong for us to skip it. But so that we have that, and they say that some of the Xeris of Tachvatan and Chmelnytsky took place during this period. But what happens here is that also we have to look at it as a time of rejoicing. Now it's hard to do because, we're not taking haircuts and we're not listening to music, but we do have to look at it in this more macro sense of, wait a minute, what are we doing Chol HaMoed? What is Chol HaMoed you're supposed to do? Chol HaMoed, you're supposed to appreciate the holiday. It's half weekday, it's half Yontif. So this is like half Pesach, half Shavuos, but it's the days in between, it's the intermediate days between Pesach and Shavuos, between national freedom and national identity, where we are identified by the Torah, and this helps us. And how do we do so? By counting the Omer. Okay, so therefore, when we talk about Atzeret, so just like Atzeret on Shavuos is what caps off the entire experience of all the Yontif season in Tishrei. Now, I know the Gemara, the Medrash doesn't mention Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but we could certainly add that in, that there's a whole feeling that we have in the month of Tishrei. It's the time when comes August and you tell your boss, yeah, I'm not going to be in for the next month. I will not even be remote. I'm not coming in, okay? Because it's Yontif. And this year it falls Tuesday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, okay? And the worst is when people have to start a new job and then they take a peek at the calendar, they're like, should have started in October. Okay. Or if you have to go tell your professor, or if you have to go tell your instructor, whatever it might be, can't make it. But that's the whole season. And the culmination of that is Atzeret. God holding us back. He wants to get the most out of us as possible. You want to spend the most time with your beloved. Just like he said, and Ramban says it's akin to creation. Creation, the culmination of creation was Shabbos, 6 days of creation, followed by Shabbos. The culmination of Pesach, the culmination of the Omer, which he calls Chol HaMoed, is Atzeret, is Shavuos, the giving of the Torah. So therefore, all over Chazal, all over the Gemara, and all over rabbinic literature, they refer to Shavuos as Atzeret, which then understands why we have the motif of Zman Matan Torasenu. What makes Shavuos the culmination of everything? It's not the giving of the fruits, because we're not an agricultural society. We don't even live in Israel. They did at the time. But for us, what makes it the culmination, of course, is the giving of the Torah, which gives us our national religious identity and what guides us throughout. And that should put everything into context. Now, this also explains, by the way, if people ask the question, so why do we read Ruth? Some say maybe it would be more appropriate to read Shir Shirim. That's a whole other talk for another time. But why do we read Ruth? One of the reasons why we read Ruth, aside from the agricultural aspect, is also has to do with Torah. And that is because Ruth, if when we say the Ten Commandments represents the written Torah, Ruth represents the oral tradition. And why is that? It's because how does the book of Ruth end? The book of Ruth ends with the genealogy of, and Boaz, holy is David. Thank you. Thanks for coming on to Musaf or on to laning. Okay. Or hit the refreshments, depending on which reading you're going to. Now, what's the big deal? The big deal is that because when it came time for King David to take over, people questioned the genuine nature of his lineage, or the pureness of his lineage, because he descended from converts, but not only not converts, but she came from Moab. And the Torah says that you can't accept a convert from Moab. However, we have a tradition, and this is mentioned in the Gemara, we have a tradition that it only applied to Moabite men. It did not apply to Moabite women. Moabite women were allowed to convert, the Haraya, and what's the proof? Is that Ruth HaMoaviyah, she became the progenitor of David HaMelech, of King David. Now, how do we know this? Again, that's oral tradition. So that's why we read on Shavuos, we read the paradigmatic example of oral tradition, of like the Melech of David Melech Yisrael Chavek Hayam, the progenitor of Melech Mashiach, comes from converts. And I always say that's kind of God's sense of humor, is because we think we're so we're so pure, we could pick this, that, and the other. But God says, yeah, okay, I'm going to give you a scrawny redhead king who plays music, and he has a best friend who, the relationship is unusual, but he's going to be the king of Israel, and he's going to do, and look where he comes from, okay? And by the way, and look where, the rest of them come, the story of Yehuda and Tamar and the daughters of Lot. I mean, we can go on and on and on and on. God picks his heroes from unlikely places. But be that as it may, it's very important for us to have the proper sort of mindset when it comes to celebrating Shavuos. So it's not like, it's another Yontif. But Shavuos really is, what we should do is we should go back to how we felt on the night of the Seder and think about how much pride we had then of being Jewish and who we are and how far we've come and what we've survived and how hard people work to make sure that we could have this tradition. He says, if we could take that feeling and then transpose it onto Shavuos as well and say, and this Shavuos is the realization of what we took pride in on Pesach. And that's really what this is all about. And these days leading up to what are all Chol HaMoed. We should take a trip every day. We should go to Great Adventure every day on Sphera. But that's really what this is. So hopefully with that mindset, we can go into this Yontif and with a tremendous amount of really appreciation. And again, I say pride, like gava, but in the pure sense, meaning look who we are. Look what God gave us. Look what God shows us. And then it'll help us not chas v'shalom denigrate the Yontif and say like, ugh, but also more importantly to appreciate and say like, thank God we have it. Nasalano, we as a Torah, we have the Torah. God gave us the Torah. Nota b'sochenu, chaye olam. We have the eternal life is given to us because what has kept us is the Torah. Everything else in the world changes. Every value, this changes. What's constant? Torah. Torah is a constant. This year, I was reading in the maybe it was the Saturday paper, the weekend paper, about the fashion trends and stuff. I'm very big on fashion trends. It's making a serious comeback, which is just
Overalls.
overalls, right? Overalls. So I'm thinking like, are you joking? By the way, remember when bell bottoms came back? They weren't good the first time around when I was a kid. I didn't want them the second time around, but this is what happens. Is these things, because somebody decides somewhere, there's that great scene in The Devil Wears Prada. One of the great movies of all. I wish Eliane was here. Eliane, you have to watch it. She's not here. Eliane, you're watching the video. You have to watch The Devil Wears Prada for so many reasons. But when, they're picking out like these two blue belts and the girl's laughing and she's like, you laugh, but you realize that the clothes you're wearing were chosen for you by the people in this room and they decide what style and what fashion is. But when it comes to Torah, Torah is a constant. Torah is always and for all time. And that's not something that's subject to fashion, to trends, whatever. But it's our job is to appreciate it and to learn it and to study it. And Emir Hashem will all be zocheh to have a full Kabbalah Torah. So again, I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful Chag. We will not be meeting next Tuesday, obviously, because it is a Chag. We'll pick it up after that. And again, I hope if the weather's nice enough, we could sit outside and everybody could bring your own like coffee and you can have your own table, whatever you want, but it'll be nice. Listen to the birds chirping and enjoy nature. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.